Hi, I'm Tim Wiedrich, Section Chief for the Emergency Preparedness Response Section with the North Dakota Department of Health. Thanks for attending this presentation about potential 2019 spring flooding in North Dakota. During our program, the National Weather Service will provide an assessment of the flood risks, will provide an overview of the public health and medical flood plans, including situational awareness briefings, patient and vulnerable population evacuations, public health and medical response supplies and equipment, memorandums of agreement, and we'll answer your questions. Well, North Dakota is no stranger to spring flooding. Ellen Schlag, who's a hydrologist with the National Weather Service, is joining us now, and he'll be giving us an overview for this year's flood risk. Ellen?
Okay, well, thanks, Tim. So we're going to look real quickly today at the general flood threat across the state. And for that, we're just going to use a couple of real quick imageries. So when we look at North Dakota right now, we're going to have a flood season, and technically speaking, we're already in the melt. So that being the case, we're starting to see what is going to transpire with our snowpack. And in particular, yesterday I was out driving around western North Dakota, and I was really surprised at how much snow had already left the countryside, even within the few hours I was out in western North Dakota. So we're seeing the melt really starting to progress in the western part of the state, and that's going to slowly move more easterly and northerly. But for the time being, it's out in the Badlands. So first and foremost, let's look at the snowpack that we have around the state. This image is only a couple of days old at this point, or it's not even that, it's one I captured this morning. So here's a picture of the expected snow water equivalent across North Dakota right now as inches of water. And when we look out into the very southwest corner, we're down to around 1, maybe 1.5 inches of water equivalent sitting on the ground across most of the Badlands and the southwestern corner of the state. And that's the one that is currently the melt is underway and progressing quite nicely, I think. I saw very little water actually moving yesterday. So I would say that the flood risk for snowpack in North Dakota in the southwestern part of the state is actually really minimal right now. And it's going to unfold very nicely. As we move to the northwest corner of the state, we're seeing some melt in the Little Muddy River Basin over by Williston. Again, we don't see any real cause for concern in the northwest corner. Moving into north central North Dakota, there we have the Souris River Basin, also known as the Mouse River. The Mouse River Basin, or the Souris River, above Minot, that means upstream of Minot, we see very little risk. The Canadians have indicated that they don't believe that there are two major dams on the system, both at Rafferty and the new one, newly named Grant Devine, what we used to always refer to as Alameda Dam. Those two, they don't expect to even fill up this year. So those two dams are going to exert considerable control over that northern part of the Souris River Basin. And then in North Dakota, we have Lake Darling to capture the snowfall that will melt as we go through the season here. It'll capture all that water that's coming, that's being generated below the Canadian dams. So we're pretty comfortable in that the upper Souris River Basin isn't going to experience much flooding. As we get downstream of Minot, though, the flood risk starts to gradually increase. By the time you get into Logan, Sawyer, Velva, you're starting to look more at normal levels of flood risk. We're not expecting any kind of real significant or severe threats of flooding there, but we do think they have at least a normal risk. Where it starts to increase considerably is when you get to the downstream component of the Souris River Basin in North Dakota. That's in the West Hope area. It doesn't affect the community of West Hope, but that portion from Towner up through West Hope, that's where all the snowpack in the Souris River Basin is at its highest. And so places like Willow Creek over by Willow City, we expect to see a pretty good amount of water moving through there. And then from Towner, Bantry on up into Canada, the Souris River will probably have pretty good amounts of water, mostly minor flooding, not a lot of impacts. As we move to south central North Dakota, in particular around the Bismarck area, Apple Creek has at least a really good shot at reaching minor flood stage. We don't expect a tremendous amount of impacts from there unless we get something like a rain on snow event. Most of the snowpack and the water in it is up in the upper portion of Apple Creek, far east of Bismarck. It's not in the Bismarck area itself, but it does have to come down through Bismarck. So that water we are expecting to be in full melt here over the next couple of days. And there's a little bit of a risk of some rain this weekend, but it should be pretty nominal, maybe a tenth of an inch or so, so not a lot. So that so far is looking pretty good. To the south, we have Beaver Creek that flows through Linton. Linton has a really good shot at reaching at least minor flood stage. There's a tremendous amount of snow water equivalent upstream of the city of Linton. So far, we don't believe there's been a heck of a lot of melt over there, but there has been at least the ripening and the prepping of that snowpack getting ready to melt and run off into Beaver Creek. That we would expect to see really start kind of unfolding as we get into this weekend, and perhaps early next week we should start seeing a fair amount of water moving through Beaver Creek. Now, those are the places that really have normal to not much above normal flood risk. Where we see unusual flood risk this year is as we continue going east. The southern James River Basin, i.e. that below the city of Jamestown, they have a tremendous amount of snow water equivalent down there. Perhaps 4.5 to 5 inches of water equivalent across broad areas. Smaller localized areas might have 6 or 6.5 inches of water equivalent sitting on the ground. That we're pretty confident is going to cause at least some overland flooding, and those smaller streams like the Maple River, the Beaver Creek down there, those are the ones that are probably at the biggest risk of seeing problematic high water. Not necessarily the James River itself, because the dams at Jamestown are fully expected to exert a great deal of control over the runoff from upstream. So then, once again, it's a tale of simply how much water is below Jamestown on the ground and those little streams that eventually flow into the James River. So we expect to see at least a fair amount of overland flooding and flooding of small streams in the southern James River Basin. Now, where the big show is going to be this year is going to be over in the Red River Valley. Everything from Wahpeton, Fargo, Grand Forks, the Red River system is going to have a tremendous amount of runoff based upon the snowpack that we currently have. There has not been a lot of melt out there right now, but we know that that snowpack, they're looking at 4.5 to 5 inches of water equivalent over pretty large areas, and it's sitting on a pretty cold ground. So those are usually the conditions that we see that contribute to a fair amount of runoff being generated quickly when we get into those warmer temperatures. And that's probably only just now getting to the point where that snowpack is starting to ripen and should be producing some melt water over the coming days. But that's a system that typically doesn't experience a lot of runoff and melt until we get later into very end of March and into probably early April. That'd be kind of the expected time frame for right now. So the big risk there is one of, if they can get a rainstorm that comes in, it will really exacerbate the problems. For the time being, we don't see any of those big rain events coming in, but that is one of those outlying risks, and it's something that's going to be overhanging that area for the next couple of weeks. And with that, Tim, that's really pretty much the state in a nutshell.
Great. Ellen, can you talk about where the Weather Service information that's most current, what are the best places to get that, so as the hospitals and public health units and other medical providers know where the sources are to get the information directly from the Weather Service as it progresses? Sure.
The easiest one is to always just remember weather.gov. If you can remember weather.gov and then put a / at the end of that, and your local office, whether it's in western part of the state, Bismarck, so it's weather.gov/Bismarck or BIS. And in the eastern part of the state, so if you're in the Cheyenne or over into the Red River Basin, there it would be weather.gov Fargo Grand Forks or FGF.
Great. Thanks, Ellen. I appreciate that update. Well, let me begin to visit with you now about the flood operations for public health and medical. We're going to spend a few moments going through this process in terms of the types of operating rhythm that you can expect as we proceed through a normal flood season. Now, it is impossible for us to make the determination in terms of exactly how, if any, flood is going to occur, how things will unfold, but I want to talk about the major components of what's associated with the normal flood responses. North Dakota has formed a coalition of the entire state, and that coalition consists of public health, all of the medical providers, whether we're talking about hospitals, long-term care, EMS services, and a wide variety of other entities that are part of that coalition. And that coalition basically is the organized approach in terms of how government and the private sector, in terms of the medical system and the public health systems, address large-scale emergencies within North Dakota. So as we walk through the next few moments, I want to talk about how we're going to be doing briefings and how the Emergency Operations Center activations come into play. We'll talk about patient and vulnerable population evacuations if that needed to occur. We'll talk about how the medical system and public health can obtain supplies and equipment for emergency response. And then if facilities are evacuated, we'll briefly talk about repatriation, how patients and residents are returned back to facilities. And then finally, we'll be, during this section, talking about hardening facilities. In other words, those situations where we're not going to do an evacuation, but the medical facility needs some additional assistance in order to maintain their operations in their current location. So let's go ahead and lead off by having a conversation about the briefings. You're actually on the primary format right now, how briefings are delivered. These briefings will be happening as they are right now before any flood event occurs so that we can keep the public health and medical system apprised of what the situation is regarding flooding and its potential. They'll be happening more frequently during the flooding phase and then following the receipt of whatever waters we would end up being contending with, then we would be following up after those processes as well. So as we move through these live events, you'll receive a health alert notice. That's how we'll let you know that there's an upcoming operation and a briefing that you'll be able to receive. And you'll either go to the video conference sites or we'll also be able to be participating through webcasts in which you can click on and view the process during the live event, just as we are doing now. But then after the briefing is completed, we'll be posting these in an archived version actually on our website. And what you're seeing right now on the screen is the link to get to those archived versions. You can, once you go to, this link of www.ndhealth.gov/ET, just look for the webcast training icon, and then you can search for whatever the specific briefing that you're looking for, but they'll appear in that window in a chronological order. The next thing I want to talk about is the actual emergency operations centers and how these come into play during large-scale responses. Within the state process, we have the State Emergency Operations Center, and that's operated under the coordination of the Department of Emergency Management. So that organization contains the coordination component of the private sector and the public sector. And this health section, the public health and medical response component that we're involved in, is a part of that. And so we have representatives that will be at the State Emergency Operations Center, also called the SEOC. Our response objectives are actually created at that level during a flood. And then for the implementation component of it, we then move to the Department Operations Center. That's where you're at right now. The Health Department is the lead agency for that. The DOC, as we refer to it, for Department Operations Center, has a responsibility for coordinating the public health and the medical components of the system. And that process then is interconnected with the local entities. And so this is some video of our Department Operations Center here at the State Health Department. The Operations Center itself seats 50. Usually we're not anywhere near that number of people in the Emergency Operations Center. It's, as you know, scalable based on incident command, and that's dependent on the actual size and scope of whatever the event is. And then finally, there are linkages between the State Emergency Operations Center, the Department Operations Center, and then the various local operations centers. That could be your local emergency manager. Many hospitals establish their own emergency operations center. Public health usually is over in the county or city emergency operations center, coordinating those local entities. So that's basically how the emergency response system fits together. And it's from that process that the State Emergency Operations Center objectives for that operating period are conveyed throughout the system so that we can remain coordinated as one complete response process. Well, let's talk a little bit now about medical evacuations and also vulnerable population evacuations. In our state, we utilize the same process whether we're evacuating a medical facility, whether it's a hospital or a long-term care facility or a basic care facility, anything that has a medical component where there are residents or patients in. We utilize the same infrastructure that we do if we're evacuating vulnerable populations that are living in their own homes. And so the processes are slightly altered in terms of how we collect folks, but the basic tenets in terms of how we do the triage, in other words, sort people, how we track people, assign destinations, provide the medical transportation, all of that is the same process throughout the system. As part of that process, we have vehicles and staffing. So the tracking of the response vehicles, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a few moments, is based on a system we call the VAST system, and it just stands for Vehicle and Staff Tracking. This is a process where when the vehicles are coming into an area to do an evacuation, there's a separate area established that's the collecting point for the staff and the vehicles as they arrive within that community. It's called a staging area. And we have a process in place where the vehicles are checked in, the staff accompanying the vehicles are checked in, and then from that location, they're assigned to the actual mission within that locality. And so this process is paper-based as the vehicles and the staff initially arrive, so we move them through as quickly as possible. It goes very fast in terms of that component. And then we catch the paperwork up into a management information system that then interconnects all of the other management information systems so that we can tell in near real time the location of vehicles, staff, and ultimately complete the necessary paperwork at the end of the process to apply for whatever reimbursement, if there's any available through the Stafford Act at a federal level, or to do whatever else is appropriate for the actual response component after the response is over. So again, that's the VAST system. There are multiple assets that are part of the high-capacity medical transportation system. Right now, you're looking at one of two purpose-built buses that are ambulance buses. One's located in Bismarck, the other one's in Fargo. And these are deployed under memorandums of agreement that we have in place for the provision of these services. And so those are services and transportation mechanisms that would be part of the process that would be deployed if necessary. In addition to that, we have 6 school buses that are converted permanently to serve as ambulance buses. These really have a configuration inside that is based on a kit that lets us place wheelchairs or stretchers in these units. They also have things like the normal array of medical equipment such as suction and oxygen, and the process of these specific units. Most of these have wheelchair lifts so that we're not needing to use ramps that are part of this. But in addition to that, there are other bus companies that we have contracts with to provide drivers and we have additional kits so that we can pull the seats out and convert those school buses into stretcher and wheelchair coaches that would be used during the flood, and then after the situation is over, we can convert them back to normal school bus activity once again. Those typically do not have wheelchair lifts in them, and so we end up using a ramp configuration for those. There are also a number of vehicles that are wheelchair coaches that have been donated by long-term care facilities to the state medical cache, in addition to the buses that I was talking about, and that number are continuing to grow as well. So right now we have 5 of those types of vehicles. Each one will hold about 4 wheelchair positions in them, and the beauty of those is that they're both air-conditioned, heated, and have wheelchair lifts. The conversions that we do is to pull most of the seats out and make them mostly wheelchair position. Additionally, we have medical shelters. These medical shelters are either buildings of opportunity, so things like gymnasiums, if they're existing, that we can convert by placing equipment in them and supplies, and then bringing staff in. And we have the capability of doing a wide variety of care levels within medical shelters. It can either be basic life support care for low acuity patients or advanced life support care for high acuity patients. And if we don't have buildings of opportunity, then we can use tent systems that would be part of that process and basically stand up just a medical shelter, depending on the size that's necessary. That will be dictated in terms of the number of tents that are necessary for that specific operation. If it warrants, such as the complete loss of a hospital, we can also establish a medical forward operating base. Now, this is a complete setup that would have a portable emergency department. It would have the medical surge floor, for lack of a better term. Certainly not at that same sophistication as in a hospital, but in a tent-based system, there would be the ability to provide that level of care, of medical care that would be necessary to establish a temporary operation. There are the dormitory services and the other things that are necessary in order to support the staff and also to maintain the patients in that environment as well. And so that medical forward operating base would be for scenarios that would be highly, highly unlikely in a flood situation. That's really much more geared towards a situation where there's complete loss of hospital facilities and unlikely to be returned in a short period of time. So situations like a tornado and so forth. But we can conceive of certain situations where that could be happening in a flood scenario as well. There is the mobile medical unit. Now, this is the emergency department that I was talking about on wheels. It's a semi-tractor trailer combination, completely self-contained, and this has the capability of delivering what you would find typically in a normal emergency department. So there are normally capacities set up for 8 patients within this facility, but each one of these patient positions can surge to a total of 16. So what I mean by that is that the various monitors and so forth that are set up for individual units or individual rooms where there's an oxygen outlet and a suction outlet and so forth, that is doubled for each one of the positions. So we can fit 16 in there. It's tight, it's crammed, but that can surge to that level if it's necessary. There are really 2 modes of operation here. One is if a medical facility has lost its physical structure, but still has the necessary staff to continue to function as a medical unit. In that scenario, we can just bring in the assets and the hospital can continue to function as they would with their own staff, just using these assets to provide the necessary services. But if, in fact, a medical unit is completely obliterated, there's no staff, there's not a mechanism to provide that level of care, then we can bring in this unit along with the actual staffing that are part of a staffing provision that we'll be talking about in just a moment. So in terms of staff, the Medical Reserve Corps is a group of about 1,000 providers within the state that have raised their hand and said during a large-scale emergency, send me. And so these are primarily physicians, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, and so forth that have indicated their willingness to respond to these types of events. And so at the time of an emergency, we reach out to them through the Health Alert Network. We ring their phones and check on their availability. And if they're available for the response, we then assign a staging area for them to report to and assign the mission to them so that they can fulfill the types of services that I was talking about previously. As that process, as I just described it, is mostly medical, but it really does go beyond medical. We also can utilize people that are non-medical but willing to support these operations. We also have a wide variety of folks that are doing public health functions such as epidemiology and other similar functions. And so if you are aware of people or if you're interested yourself, please contact us for participation in the Medical Reserve Corps. Beyond that, there's also the ESAR VIP program. Now, this is a process that has a download capability from the various licensure boards. There are about 16 licensure boards in North Dakota that we receive information from. And so if we're not able to get sufficient participation from the Medical Reserve Corps, we have the ability then to ring the phones of the remaining roughly 16,000 licensed medical providers within the state and check on their availability and see if they're willing to participate in a just-in-time process. If we're not able to muster enough there, then we start reaching to outside sources, other states, for example, or through the federal government for additional resources coming in to meet the needs. For supplies and equipment, there's the state medical cache, and this has a wide variety of durable and disposable equipment. It has a wide variety of supplies, including some pharmaceuticals. However, the pharmaceuticals are mostly in the forms of antibiotics and antivirals. But on our website, there is a listing of the types of supplies that are available, and depending on the urgency of the entity that's requesting it, that dictates how we actually provide the transportation to get it to the requesting entity. The process, if in fact we have a shortage of things like ventilators or defibrillators or oxygen concentrators, again, those types of durable pieces of medical equipment are all available within the state medical cache and a wide variety of others that go beyond that. The process for medical facilities to order or public health units to order is just basically to go online on our website, and it's like an Amazon.com, an online shopping experience where there's a shopping basket. You go through the catalog, you indicate the types of things that you would like to procure, and then once you've placed your order, there'll be a call back from our staff, and this is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We'll validate the order with you over the phone, make the determination in terms of the method of transportation. If it's something that's very urgent, we will physically drive it at that point from our location to your location. The same thing holds true on the opposite side. If it's something that's not urgent and we can use third-party carriers, and if that's still operating, then rather than doing the direct deployment, we'll use third-party carriers like UPS and FedEx and so forth. We have a wide variety of transportation equipment, and so that's anything from 53-foot trailers to 12-foot trailers, vans, and again, a wide variety of other types of vehicles that are part of the transportation process. So again, it just depends on the level of urgency in terms of the medical facility that's doing the requesting. That will dictate how we're doing the distribution. Let me just quickly mention that if there is a need to do this, we will clarify at that point in time when the order is being placed, if in fact there are any charges for anything that's brought out. And this gets a little bit situational. So if we've got a federal declaration, there are many federal assets that we have within this supply, which is about $15 million worth of medical supplies that we can deploy. And there are no charges for those. For other items, if we don't have a federal declaration, there may be the cost of replacement for what's consumed, but in those scenarios, the medical entities are in fact able to charge patients back through that process and recoup the cost, and the expectation is then the whatever was drawn from the medical cash is then replaced so we can continue to sustain the medical cash. Let me talk next about repatriation, and that is how we potentially bring patients and residents back. And that is a reverse process, but frankly much more scheduled in terms of the return of patients and residents. We can and do routinely assist with that process, and so it's one that's coordinated by appointment with the facilities, and so there's, unlike the actual evacuation process, a much more anticipated scheduled time that will be happening with repatriation. One thing that typically gets lost is that depending on what's happened with the facility, there may be a need to do a site survey in order to return the unit back to functioning. And when we do the evacuation, as part of our processes, we routinely need to reach out to CMS and request waivers as part of that process. Now, none of this is interrupting the actual evacuation, because we clearly will always preserve life and limb over catching these waivers up. So we do what we need to do at the time that the event is in order to maintain the safety of the patients and residents. But there's a process that gets invoked as part of this that does need to be followed through and resolved. I'm going to turn our attention now over to George Gerhardt. George is going to be walking through another scenario, and that is when we have a situation where the facility itself is not receiving water, but that process is one in which we want patients or residents to stay in the facility, but that they may have some form of interruption of utility services which would otherwise force us to evacuate. We call that hardening the facility. If we can compensate for the lack of utilities or some other issue that's going on with the facility, we would prefer to harden a facility over doing the evacuation. And George is going to be speaking to us now about what resources are available to you for us to assist in hardening your facility. George?
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Tim. To help harden your facility threatened by flooding, we have several systems that will help maintain occupancy until the systems are restored or an evacuation can be accomplished. Starting off with, there are heating and air conditioning units that we have in place. These include air conditioners, 5-ton AC and heating units, and heat wagons. Using a combination of these units along with fans in the building, we can keep the area in the building fairly comfortable for an extended period of time. Next off, we have generators. The state medical cash maintains a 610 kilowatt generator that can power a fairly large building, or like we like to say, a small. Other generators we maintain in the cache are 100 kilowatt, 80 kilowatt, 45s, 17s, 6, and 2. The larger generators can be tied directly into your buildings with the help of an electrician to make sure that we get everything hooked up right and are safe. But these different generator sizes we can specifically tailor to the needs of your facility and what you're going to do for that. And communication equipment, if your facility would happen to lose communications, the medical cache has several different assets available to be used for communications. in your facility, such as cellular phones, mobile hotspots, satellite phones, satellite data terminals, handheld radios, business band radios, mobile radio setups that would operate on the state radio. We also have an AM transmitter to keep your facility or area informed about what's going on. And we also have a high frequency transmitter and receiver that would help communicate with other states or with ham radio operators. The mobile command trucks are also available to use. Each truck is available. It is completely self-contained. The back compartment has seating for 6, plenty of room for storage. It also has a lavatory facility, freshwater holding tanks, a microwave, a refrigerator, sinks, AM/FM radios. Other amenities include Wi-Fi hotspots, computers with internet access, printers, a cellular repeater, and satellite phones. And last is the wraparound services. We have the capability to serve meals to 500 people per meal. So 500 for lunch, 500 for dinner, 500 for breakfast. This is done by heating pre-cooked entrees and other foodstuffs and holding them in a food warmer to be served as needed. All the items you would need, all you have to do is need to heat, hold, and serve at the proper temperature. We have this set up in kits, and the items in each kit include one convection oven, a food warmer, a food holding cabinet, and a gadunk. And a gadunk contains a microwave, a refrigerator, a coffee maker. Also included in these kits are heated serving dishes, 100-cup coffee makers, toasters, and anything you need to serve meals. Remember, these units are only meant to preheat pre-cooked food. It's not meant to cook from staff. We aren't licensed. These are not licensed food serving areas, so only preheated or pre-cooked food is available. That's all I have for you to harden the facilities, and go back to Tim.
Thanks, George. So to be clear, the process that I've just outlined involves a number of partnerships that exist throughout the entire state for making this system work. The role of the Emergency Operations Center is to provide necessary assets, whether that's people, processes, or equipment and supplies, to coordinate the destinations, handle the necessary clearances in order to make the process move smoothly, and provide command and control in conjunction with the local partners that are part of the response process. The coalition approach really does move this all into a partnership, that we're functioning at all levels of public and private partnership in order to bring the best possible services to the citizens of our state. There are a number of memorandums of agreement that I haven't talked about in detail. Just to touch quickly, some of the places where we do have memorandums of agreement in place are with various university systems in order to access the gymnasiums if that's necessary for sheltering, the hospitals throughout the state that are necessary for care if there's uncompensated care, that we have the process in place to still provide those services when necessary. A number of transportation entities such as wheelchair coaches, of which there are about 60, and we'll get into that in more detail in just a few moments, and then about 100 ambulances with all the ambulance services across the state that can be deployed as part of this process. It's really important to understand that even though it's a local emergency, for the public health and medical system, we function as a team at all levels. And so that means that there is some level of involvement at the state level, even if it is just a local emergency. If the evacuation is to be undertaken, and we have especially outside funding sources like the Stafford Act, it is important that you participate through the emergency management process and not as public health and medical entities act independently. Because number one, there's liabilities associated with that since you're not responding as part of the formal system. so none of the normal tort protections and other processes in place would apply in that circumstance. But number two, in order to be eligible for the types of reimbursements, especially things like Stafford, that it is necessary to be assigned missions as part of that process. And the way you do that is to participate in this system. Well, let's turn our attention now to Vanessa Rail. Vanessa is the Director of Planning at the North Dakota Long-Term Care Association, and she's going to be talking about some very specific memorandums of agreement with long-term care facilities and some really unique things that have happened in our state that, quite frankly, have caught the attention of many other states as they're looking at some of the very strong benefits that are being enjoyed as a result of this partnership. Vanessa?
All right, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yes, as Tim mentioned, I am the liaison between the Department of Health HPP program and the Long-Term Care Association members. And we have over 200 long-term care facilities in the state. So this relationship is very important as we get into situations such as flooding. The memorandum of agreement that we have with the state is a agreement that lasts for 2 years. Currently, we have one in place until June of 2019. And this memorandum agreement basically states that you would accept residents or vulnerable adults into your facility, and then also, if need be, that you would provide transportation, and along with the transportation, the staff that would need to go along with that transportation, such as nursing support, drivers, etc. And one thing that's really important in this process is to know that to be able to be reimbursed for these, it would have to be a state declaration of emergency. But these reimbursements are very important to the facilities. We also are doing a current inventory with the current flood situation, an updated inventory of the transport vehicles. So hopefully all the facilities have gotten in touch with me for that. Also, I want to mention on a high level that we do have also an agreement through the members of the association for financial reimbursement for Medicare, Medicaid, private pay. We have a memorandum agreement that is signed at the same time we do the one with the Department of Health. And this looks at direct costs, indirect costs that would be reimbursed through the different programs. So that's very important. Right now we have those signed with 80 of the skilled nursing facilities. And I also want to mention that we have an agreement for MDS evacuation procedures, so that if you need to update MDS information, we have those directions as well. That would be a high level that I have, Tim, on that. So
thank you so much, Vanessa. Well, we hope that you found the information in today's program beneficial. We hope that you join us for future programs. This program will be available for viewing on demand, and that will be up shortly. We'll go ahead and post on the screen right now the URL, the location for those archived websites. It was the same one that I had previously given you, but you can find that information generally at ndhealth.gov. Just look for the category marked webcasts and training, and that should take you there. Well, thank you for joining us. We hope to visit with you soon.